Good afternoon. I'm Jim Inkster, your moderator, and the host is here, the governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards. He's been in office now 8 months and 10 days, and this is his sixth Ask the Governor show. And as noted, the number, if you'd like to call toll free wherever you are, is 877-217-5757. And Governor John Bel Edwards will be heading to Washington immediately after this show, so he delayed his trip to be with us. Governor, first of all, you had a birthday last Friday.
I did, 50.
50.
Half 100.
How does it feel to be 50?
Well, I don't feel any older. I will tell you, but the number of folks who knew it was my birthday, I don't know how that got out quite as widely as it did, but we had a great celebration. It lasted for about a week. Between my goings and comings to Washington, D.C. But it's been a special time with family and friends.
And you've been busy, as noted. It's been quite an indoctrination as the state's chief executive, and I see the headline in today's Advocate saying state flood aid tied up in congressional bickering. Yeah. You've been to Washington a few times. How's that looking?
Well, Jim, I am optimistic. The fact of the matter is we made a request to the president for community development block grant funding. In fact, we made a lot of different types of requests, all aimed at making sure we can have a full and speedy recovery here in Louisiana. The most essential component is the community development block grant funding, particularly for our housing needs. But we have been now to Congress twice, each of the last 2 weeks. I'm going again today. And I will tell you, the president received our request, and he transmitted his own request to Congress for $2.6 billion in community development block grant funding in the continuing resolution, which they are currently taking up. And in the House and in the Senate, on a bipartisan basis, we have been well received, and I sense that there is support for giving us timely and meaningful assistance. There was a time when it looked like it might get caught up in some other skirmishes and debates they were having. But the fact of the matter is we're going to get a sizable down payment on our recovery in the CR, and then we will go back in the lame duck and look for the rest of our recovery relief package, both in terms of whatever remains on the CDBG package, but also social services block grant, emergency transportation funding for the Corps of Engineers to finish the Comite River diversion project, and other things that we have asked the president for and Congress for, but know that we're going to have to wait until the lame duck session.
And many programs are in place to help those in need. Tell us what's going on with the Shelter at Home program.
Well, the Shelter at Home program, as you might know, and hopefully the listeners know, if their homes have been damaged, they need, if they want this to be an option for them, if they want to move home or stay in their homes as soon as possible to make sure that their homes are safe, secure, and habitable, we have unveiled a program. I think we're in our third week now with this program, where individuals can register for the Shelter at Home program. We will have the home inspected, and if it's eligible, we will send a team in to make minor temporary fixes to that home to make sure that it is safe, habitable, and secure. And it is a sheltering program, and that's the key that I want people to understand, Jim. It's paid for by FEMA. 90% of the dollars are going to come from FEMA, and the other 10% will come from the state. But FEMA is not allowed by federal law to engage in permanent repairs to homes. And so it's a limited scope of work, but it is designed to make sure you have a functioning bathroom, that you've got a functioning kitchen, that you don't have wet drywall and insulation and flooring, that the air conditioning system works, that you have a hot water heater, that sort of thing. Make sure that any mold gets remediated. And then people can move home, stay in their home while they effect the more permanent repairs. And we're doing that because some of the other options, while they are options, they're limited. There are only so many hotel rooms. There are only so many rental units. But mostly we're doing this because people want to be in their homes. That's where they need to be. That's where they want to be. And by the way, the businesses need employees and customers. The schools need children. and the churches need people in pews on Sunday. So we're trying to get people back at home just as soon as possible. But it is going well. We're ramping up the program dramatically in terms of the number of inspectors, the number of contractors that are working, and we're going to make sure that we ramp that program up and we increase our capacity so that many more homes are benefited in the very near future.
What's the biggest concern that people are stating to you?
Well, it's mostly about the homes. You know, the home for the average person is the largest single investment they're ever going to make. And many people, as you are well aware, did not have flood insurance because they weren't required to have it. They didn't live in a flood zone, but they received flood damage, and so there's no coverage. They may still owe money on their home. In fact, they may still owe more money than the home is worth in its current condition. They didn't have insurance, and they don't have a bank account from which they can draw to make these repairs. And so they are trying to make the decision. They really want to make a viable decision to get back in their homes as quickly as possible, which is why we've been in Congress each of the last 2 weeks, and I'm going back now so that we can get relief in terms of housing. That's what we want the community development block grant funding for in the immediate term, is to provide help to people in the housing. But also, we need for business owners to be able to make a good, viable, quick decision to reopen their businesses too, if they haven't yet done that. So we're going to work, but that is what I'm hearing more and more of from individuals when I talk to them at their homes or in shelters or and by the way, business people as well.
Now, you negotiated with the White House, and as a result, 90% of the funding is going to be covered by the government, the federal government. How significant is that?
Well, it's tremendously significant, not just for the state government, although it's significant for us too, because we do have budgetary challenges. As you know, we inherited a very large deficit of $2 billion for the current year. Entering into this year, we had to make more than $300 million in cuts. We have every reason to believe that there's a couple hundred million more that we're going to have to cut in order to pay for the deficit that ran into the current year and now stands as debt that has to be retired without any additional revenue to do that. So the 90% cost share being borne by the federal government instead of 75% is huge for us, but it's also huge for the local government because it applies to them too. And this is in the public assistance component of the aid that we're receiving from FEMA. And by the way, I appreciate the president for doing it. Once we met $137 per capita in costs associated with the damages from the flood, we were eligible for the federal government to cost share to go to 90%. But it's still discretionary. It didn't have to happen, and it didn't have to go all the way to 90%. But the president acted on my request, and a request that was joined by each member of our congressional delegation, by the way. And that's one of the things that I'm proudest of. We've had a very united front, a bipartisan face on what we've been doing in Washington as it relates both to the administration and to Congress. On my trips in the last 2 weeks, for example, Billy Nungesser and Mike Strain went with me, the lieutenant governor and the ag commissioner, and we've been working very, very closely and communicating daily with our congressional delegation. And so I think that's why we're poised to have a large measure of success in the current continuing resolution and then get the additional aid that we need in November and December in the lame duck.
This is Jim Inkster. Thank you for joining us. 877-217-5757 is your number for Ask the Governor. And we are going to the phone lines in just a moment, but this recovery process has been one that has affected many areas of the state. Those of us who live in Baton Rouge may be a bit provincial, and in this case, maybe for good reason, considering all that's happening around us. But, Governor, you've traveled the whole state, and at least 20 parishes are affected adversely.
They were. The August flooding was historic. It was unprecedented and did an immense amount of damage. It's on track to be the third or fourth worst flood disaster in United States history. But in March, we had flooding around the state as well that set records literally in all four corners of the state. And one of the things I want to make sure people are aware of is that in terms of the ask that we're making on the federal government right now for recovery assistance, the March flooding damage is included in that. And so we had 56. If you took the March and the August floods and put them together, 56 of the 64 parishes were declared major federal disasters. And so that CDBG money is going to be available, which is why I appointed a task force to study recovery and populated that task force with leaders from all over the state.
Renata in New Orleans. Good afternoon, Renata. You're
Hello.
on Ask the Governor.
Yes, this is Renata. I'm calling from New Orleans. Our
Yes,
recent,
go ahead.
okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear if I was on the call. Sorry.
You were on. Go ahead.
Our recent unprecedented flood here demonstrates what climate change looks like. Scientists tell us that we need to rapidly shift to renewable sources of energy like wind and solar. I spoke with Dr. Abigail Hopper, the director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management.
All right. What about climate change, Governor?
Well, Renata, I want to thank you for the call. I don't argue with science. I don't think there's any doubt that the climate is changing. The degree to which human conduct is impacting that change, I think, is somewhat debatable. But look, we've had two record-setting floods in just several months, both of which were outside of the once-in-a-100-year window. In fact, the probability of the rain event we had in South Louisiana in August was set at once every 1,000 years. And as the frequency of these severe weather events happen, I don't think anybody can argue that the climate isn't changing. But I don't know that I'm prepared to go beyond that at the moment.
Ken in Mandeville. Good afternoon, Ken. You're on with Governor John Bell Edwards. Yes, Ken. All right. Michelle, can you check and see? We may be having some problems here with our callers hearing what I'm saying. Let's try. Let's go back to the New Orleans area. This is Paul in Slidell. Paul, good afternoon. You're on with Ask the Governor.
Thank you for having me on. Let me just start by saying I did vote for Governor John Bell Edwards, and I'm glad to see he got elected. I'm a conductor, and I conduct a lot of educational concerts in Europe. We just did a benefit concert for musicians in the Baton Rouge area who were victims of the flooding. And I would just like to know if you could say something about how I had read that the First Lady, Donna Edwards, had planned to focus her energy on music education in public schools. And is there any way that you could recommend that we could help get involved in that, bringing more music into the public schools? Because I do a lot of that in Europe, and I'd love to contribute more in Louisiana, where I'm from.
Paul, thank you for the call. And just yesterday, Don and I were in the Shreveport area together. I went out and did some economic development visits, and she went to schools, and she was inquiring in particular about art and music programs. As you may know, she, by profession, is an elementary music teacher. And I know that she always took her classes at every opportunity to see symphony orchestras and that sort of thing. So I know that she's very interested. She has been working already to try to figure out which artists who have foundations in order to help underprivileged kids and public schools have access to music education, whether it's through instruments and that sort of thing. And so if you will stay on the line, we will get your contact information, and I would love to have you and Donna be able to talk and figure out how you can contribute to her efforts, which, by the way, I'm very proud of her for what she's doing for the children of Louisiana.
Susan in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Susan. You're on with Governor John Bell Edwards. Hi, Susan. All right. Michelle, do we have Susan? Let's try Jennifer in Lafayette. Jennifer, can you hear me?
Hey.
Jennifer, you go.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
Hi, Governor Edwards. I have to confess, Governor, I did not vote for you, but I didn't vote for your opponent either. I just abstained. But I'm highly, highly impressed with your performance so far. I plan to vote for you again if you decide to run again. But my question, Governor, is about expenditures per student in Louisiana schools, and I'm curious to know. I mean, I'm not. I was a Republican until Trump got the nomination. I'm not keen on raising taxes, but I'm curious to know. We don't spend as much per student as the other states in the union, but we always seem to rank last among the rest of them. And so I'm wondering what your platform on education looks like and what we can do. I'm not just interested in test scores, but I'm interested in seeing that our best and brightest, stay in Louisiana, and that.
Well, Jennifer, thank you very much for the question. And to get to your first point, I am running for re-election in 2019, and I'm going to be counting on you. But when it comes, and I assume your question had to do with higher education, there is no doubt that Louisiana, for 8 straight years, led the country in our disinvestment in higher education with state general fund cuts to higher education year after year after year. Then we're in the aggregate more than any other state in the nation. And at the same time, we had the highest tuition increases to try to offset those cuts than any other state in the nation. So we have to invest in higher education. We have to do a better job. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that while we had a $2 billion state general fund deficit when I took office for the fiscal year that started July 1st, the cut to higher education was less than 1%. The smallest in right at a decade, virtually flat funding. Now I want to do better than that, and it's kind of sad that one of your biggest achievements is that you had the smallest cut to higher education. But considering where we started, that was quite an accomplishment. But secondly, we then saw that the tuition increases around the state this year were the smallest in right at a decade. And in fact, we had some systems, the Louisiana Community and Technical College system among them, who didn't raise tuition at all. So I think if we want to have opportunity for our kids in Louisiana, if we want our state to be what it needs to be for economic development, job creation, just quality of life, we've got to invest more in higher education. And of course, you can't invest what you don't have. And at the end of the day, it has to be in the mix. It has to be a priority. And you have to make sure that you have enough revenue that you can make these investments. We recently saw LSU, our flagship university, drop about 15 more spots in the national ranking. And that's the 3rd or 4th consecutive year where our flagship university has dropped. And the thing that they're looking at, the thing that's catching the eyes of the people who are grading all of those schools out there is the expenditure per student. And that has been falling. We've been losing ground to our neighbors and their universities, so we have to do better. And Jennifer, I appreciate your interest in higher education.
Kathy in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Kathy. You're on with Governor Edwards. Hi, Kathy. All right, let's try Mary in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Mary. You are on Ask the Governor. Good afternoon to you.
Hello to both of you.
Hi, Mary.
One of your campaign issues that caught my attention when you were running for governor was mental illness, which was one of the reasons that I voted for you, among some others. And with that being said, my 30-year-old is mentally ill, and we've recently experienced some issues that I'd like to bring up. Number one, there's a disconnect with the hospitals, doctors, and Medicare. And number two, there are discrimination issues with physical therapy facilities. I know there are many other issues, but these are the most recent that we've encountered and wanted to address.
All right. Thank you, Mary.
So I'm just trying to get more information, and if there is an email address that you could give me where I could send you specific information on these issues, I would really appreciate that.
Mary, I'm going to get you an email address here in just a moment, but thank you for the call. And obviously, with this involving a family member, most of this is going to have to be done offline. But we are committed to doing more around mental health and mental illness. One of the reasons we expanded Medicaid is because in December of last year, behavioral health became a component of the care that's available through the Medicaid program. And by the way, as of today, we're 306,000 folks enrolled in the Medicaid expansion. So we are working to make sure that they have access to more mental health treatment. As it relates to your son with respect to a disconnect with Medicare, I didn't know if you meant Medicare or Medicaid, but I'm going to ask you to stay on the line and give your information so that we can get back with you. And as far as any discrimination, we would need to know the name of the physical therapy provider so that we can look into that for you. But my email address is governorjohnbelledwards@la.gov. So that's Governor John Bell Edwards at la.gov, and I do hope you will stay on the line and then send me some more information, and we will work with you.
This is Jim Inkster. Michelle Southern is producing. The show is Ask the Governor, and Governor John Bell Edwards is here. Your number is 877-217-5757. Please be brief and pointed in your questions to the governor. Kathy in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Kathy. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon. I'm familiar with the Shelter at Home program and what it's supposed to do for someone who has lost their home due to flooding. I was wondering if you were familiar with a video that's making the rounds on Facebook. It's a contractor supposedly showing what has been done for one of his customers through the Shelter at Home program. And basically, all that they did was just to install a few outlets and reinstall the old flooded, dirty, filthy commode.
Well, Kathy, I did see it, and in fact, shortly after I saw it, I sent several members of my staff and of Sept by there to talk to the individuals, to look at the home. That some of the work there wasn't done up to standard. That home, by the way, had not been finally inspected and approved, and much of the work that you saw or that you see in that video would not have been approved and would have been redone. But there is an issue as it relates to that house, both with the quality of the work that was being done and also with the expectations, because none of the repairs in the Shelter at Home program are supposed to be permanent. In fact, FEMA cannot fund permanent repairs, and it is a shelter program, and so we have to make sure that people understand what to expect. And to help with that, we've started making sure that they are shown pictures of what their house will look like in terms of the walls, their floors, the bathrooms, the kitchen, what the appliances are going to look like, because if they don't have working appliances, they can get a mini fridge and a microwave. But yes, I am aware of it, and we took actions to address it. And not only that, I convened a meeting with all of the folks leading the management contract for the Shelter at Home program, and we watched it together. And we talked about it, and we figured out ways to make sure that we are doing much, much better than that going forward. But Kathy, I thank you for the call, and I thank you for putting up with us, because I know we had a hard time getting to you today.
Susan in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Susan. You're on with Ask the Governor.
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my call. I live in East Baton Rouge Parish, and I had over 4 feet of water in my home. I've been meeting with contractors to rebuild. But we went to the city parish permit office yesterday to obtain a permit, and we're told that they're not issuing them now to homes that had over 50% of damage, because we'll have to raise or elevate our homes. And I know that, Governor Edwards, you were working on something to try to stop that or help us, so I'm just wondering where that stands.
Susan, thank you for being patient today, too, with your call, because I know we had a hard time getting you on. I actually met with Administrator Fugate, who runs FEMA, at his office on Friday, and discussed what had been done in New York and New Jersey, where they secured a 4-year delay to allow people time to come into compliance with the standard that you're talking about. If your home is in a flood zone and is not at or above base flood elevation, and its sustained damages of 50% or greater is considered to be substantially damaged, and the local governments have zoning ordinances or building ordinances, I guess, that in order to participate in the flood insurance program and have lower premiums, in your situation, the home is supposed to be elevated. However, it has been done in the past, most recently in Hurricane Sandy. There was a 4-year delay given And in that time period, and while we certainly can't promise this result because we don't have the funding in hand, but if we're successful in getting the funding and implementing projects, we are very hopeful we're going to actually be able to lower the base flood elevation by doing drainage and flood control projects so that less people in your situation will actually have to raise their homes.
Ricky in Lake Charles. Good afternoon, Ricky. You're on the air with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Yes, sir. Governor Edwards, I've been commercials rampant for 43 years, never had a job, and our season's been washed out by the floods. In fact, I ain't been shrimping but 2 times this year, but we go to Cocoa Tree, Vermilion, all over across the Mississippi River. We live in Lake Charles. I was just wondering if there's any aid for us, or we're just going to have to sweat it out, or what the deal is.
Well, Ricky, I was talking to some shrimpers over the weekend who told me that they also believe that all of the fresh water that has been draining into the salt or brackish water is also impacting the shrimp. And so I know that it's been a very tough time. I will tell you that in my visits to Washington, we have talked about aid for individuals who were either farmers or fishermen. I'm not sure that is going to be in the initial package. We're going to continue to work on it, and I don't have any specific proposals for you, ideas for you right now in terms of what I know that we can deliver. But I can tell you, you're not the only one, Ricky, who've been bringing these issues to my attention, and I know that it's been a tough stretch for you all. And we really do need to see what we can do to bring some relief.
Scott in Opelousas. Hello, Scott. You're on the air.
Hello, Governor. Question is, we keep hearing a lot about higher education. What are we doing about lower education funding? I'm here in St. Andrew Parish, and my wife's a school teacher, and I know for the last 7 years there's been nothing but cutbacks from the last governor, and they hadn't got raises in 7 years.
Well, Scott, as you know, and first of all, thank you for the call, and I appreciate that your wife is an educator, as is mine, and it has been a tough stretch. The MFP has not increased. That's the funding formula for higher education. I'm sorry, for K through 12 education. It has not increased now in several years, and it is putting a lot of budgetary pressure on our public school districts across the state, including yours right there in St. Landry Parish. I can tell you that neither has it been cut, however. And while that's nothing to be happy about, I guess, in the larger scheme of things, considering all the cuts that have happened in the state of Louisiana, since I've been governor, unfortunately, and it's been very difficult and painful, we've cut over $500 million in spending, but we have not cut the funding formula for K through 12 education. Now, having said that, I am fully committed to putting a budget in front of the legislature next year that actually has the traditional 2.75% growth factor in it for the MFP, so that we can start relieving these pressures and start making sure we're prioritizing K through 12 education.
Mallory in Baton Rouge. Good afternoon, Mallory. You're on the air with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Yes. Hi, Governor. I was just calling because my parents, their house was flooded here in Baton Rouge, and they have contents and regular just flood insurance, but it's taking so long to get everything together. I was wondering, what is the recourse for people that were actually fully covered, but may not be able to get FEMA? What would you do for that?
Well, Mallory, thank you for the call. And at the end of the day, and I know the day seems long because the flood coverage hasn't really paid off the claims yet. But at the end of the day, I think you all are going to be happy that there is flood insurance, and I think you said for contents as well as the structure. If you've made a proof of claim to your insurance company through an adjuster, there is a certain amount of time within which they have to pay that claim. Otherwise, they are subject to penalties. And I am a lawyer, but I don't want to give legal advice on this radio program. But you all might want to talk to a lawyer who can tell you what that delay is and what you should do to make sure that their proof of claim was complete, was submitted properly, and that that actually triggered that delay within which the claim has to be paid. That's one of the most important things. The other thing is, I would just encourage you, no matter whether you've got flood insurance out there or not, to make sure that you are calling and registering with FEMA. And when that caseworker meets with you or meets with your parents, in this case Mallory, explain the situation in full and see what assistance that they may be entitled to in the short term to get them through this period of time while you wait on the flood insurance to come through.
Thank you, Mallory. Anna in Amite, hometown of the governor. Good afternoon, Anna.
Good afternoon. I just had a question. There's so much going on in our nation, especially there's a lot of tension between African Americans and police officers and whatnot. Is there possibly a coalition that can be formed? Because so many people in the African American community respect the police, but I think somewhere along the way some young men are raised or see the life and see how life happens to them, if perhaps there could be a coalition formed to reach out to them.
Anna, there's no doubt that we've got issues here in Louisiana and around the country. We need to get along. We need to make sure that people don't hate one another, and that we replace that with brotherly love. Now, that's easier said than done, but I can tell you that everybody can do better. And we need to have individuals who know how they're supposed to act, especially when they interact with police. And perhaps it needs to be part of the education process. For example, it may be that when you get your driver's license, you have to demonstrate that you know what to do when a police officer pulls you over on the road, or it may need to be incorporated into the DARE program or in education more generally. We've got to make sure that police officers have the benefit of best practices from around the country when it comes to de-escalation of situations and making sure that the situation remains under control and that lethal force is not used unless it's absolutely necessary. But there's so much that we can all do, and the shame of it is, it's a real problem. I get it. We all have responsibility. As governor, I have more responsibility probably than anybody else in the state for making sure we have initiatives to address this. But the shame of it is that there are many reasons to believe that the application of lethal force by police officers is actually not at an all-time high, as you would believe, or even those that are happening under questionable circumstances are not out of the ordinary. The difference is that today, many of these things are caught on camera, and they're being shown, and sometimes that shows all of the facts that you need to form an opinion as to whether it was proper or not, and sometimes it doesn't. But because all of this is being captured on camera, this issue is certainly, it's at the front of everybody's, it's on TV, it's on the internet, and so you see it all the time. But we all have a lot of work to do, and we are doing some work right here in Louisiana with the law enforcement community and the faith-based community to address this.
This is Jim Inkster. Michelle Southern is producing. The show is Ask the Governor. Governor John Bel Edwards is with us for one more segment. Your number toll-free is 877-217-5757. As mentioned when we started, the governor is now 8 months and 10 days into his first term, and he's a graduate of West Point and the LSU Law Center. You've been going to the LSU football games, haven't you?
I have. I am a football fan, as is my son, especially, and I've enjoyed going to the games, and certainly it's more enjoyable when we win.
Do you have people asking you about the coach?
I do, but I hope they're in jest, because that's not something I'm going to weigh in on. We have a coach, and the truth is he's won an awful lot of games, and I certainly have a lot of respect for him. But the passion around LSU football runs so high that people on both sides of that issue, or have very strong opinions, but that's, I have enough on my plate, Jim, I guess, with everything else that's going on.
Well, I see in this poll from our friend Bernie Pincinat, your job performance rating is highest among elected officials, 63%. I would imagine the coach at LSU would love to have those numbers right now.
Perhaps you'll have to ask Coach Miles, but I did see those numbers, and of course, I'm gratified by the numbers, but we have a long way to go in our state, even through this recovery. it's going to be months in making sure that we bring everything to bear that we can to get people's lives back right side up, because too many people are upside down, and we got a lot of work to do.
Ken in Mandeville, we missed you a little earlier. Ken, it's good to have you back. You're on with the governor. Hi, Ken.
Yes, sir. How are you today?
Fine.
Good. Governor Edwards, the first thing I'd like to do as a proud Marine to thank a fellow Ranger for his service.
Well,
both
thank you for yours,
military
Ken.
and public.
Thank you, Ken. Do you have a question?
Yes, sir. I have two questions. My first question is, I see references in the flooded parishes somewhere in the range between 20 and 26. The FEMA disaster order 4277 only identifies 20. Can you explain to me the disparity between those? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, there was it depends on which number you look at. I think there were 26 parishes that declared themselves to be a disaster. I believe we're at 22 with the federal disaster declaration, and that's for all categories of assistance. And then there are additional parishes that were declared federally, but only for the public assistance category of assistance. So it gets a little bit complicated, but that's why, Ken, you're seeing different numbers.
Simon in Karen Crow. Good afternoon, Simon. You're on with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Hi, Governor. Great rating you have.
Well, thank you very much, Simon.
Governor, I've been disabled since 2000, and in 2008 or 2009, they had cut we had that increase on the cost of living every year. And they cut us back for 4 years, and we thought that we was going to end up getting that back, but we never got that back. And this year, we didn't get a raise again. Could you tell me what's going on with this?
Simon, I don't know whether you're talking about a Social Security disability payment that you've been getting, and whether that's an issue, or whether it's a specific state program. And to be very honest with you, without knowing more, I cannot answer the question, but I do want to ask you to give your information. Stay on the line, give your information, and we will look into it and get back with you.
Richard in Baton Rouge. Hello, Richard. You're on the air with the governor.
Thanks, Governor, for taking the call. What I'm inquiring about is long-term infrastructure in Louisiana. I know that there's a lot of challenges the last two flooding events, and we had the interstate shut down. A lot of commerce was shut down, and I'm just thinking, they say 30 years from now, a lot of areas are going to be on the water. How do we address our infrastructure where we can continue to be an attraction for other industry, and people not taking second thoughts like, hey, we don't need it?
Well, Richard, that's a great question, and I will tell you that there's lots of different types of infrastructure that we need. Some is flood control, like the Comite River Diversion Project that has been approved. It's been on the books for a couple of decades. It hasn't received funding, and therefore it's incomplete. One of the things we're asking for is $125 million, which is what's currently authorized for that project, so that we can move it forward, get it completed, and lessen the likelihood of severe flooding in North Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish. But I will tell you, the long-term infrastructure needs are acute. We've got a $13 billion backlog. One of the things that we're going to do is, as we address ongoing infrastructure projects, we're going to make sure that where we need to, we are raising them. For example, I announced last week that we're going to not only widen I-10 between Highland Road and Prairieville, but in that section that went underwater, we're asking for design build proposals that would actually elevate that section to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And finally, with respect to transportation infrastructure overall, I convened a statewide task force that's been going around the state meeting with different stakeholders and the public to try to figure out what our most pressing priorities are and how we can move forward on those priorities, and what revenue stream needs to be in place to make that a reality, because the simple fact of the matter is the existing revenue stream is insufficient. If it were sufficient, we wouldn't have the backlog of infrastructure projects. And when we get better infrastructure, you can see an awful lot more businesses from around the country ready to come in and invest in Louisiana, create jobs here.
Janet in Ruston. Hello, Janet. Good afternoon to you. You're on with Governor Edwards.
Hello there. How are you today?
I'm fine.
Janet, doing fine. Thank you.
I have a question in regards to alternative means of transportation, most likely bicycles. I travel around the country and I get to Chicago and there's bike racks that you can just grab a bike and go. But Louisiana seems to lack in bicycle paths or roadways that are adequate to ride a bicycle on the shoulder.
Janet, that's a great question. I will tell you that a lot of the highways that we are building with wide enough shoulders to accommodate bicycles, and in fact, we're designating many of them as bicycle friendly. And there's a lot of economic development that happens if you can attract these bicycle clubs that come and ride through your parish or through your city, because you can get hundreds of them in the weekends. And I've seen what you've been talking about in my recent trips to Washington, D.C., where you have bicycles lined up that you can rent and take from place to place. We are certainly not embracing that here in Louisiana. I'm not sure how many areas in our state really are candidates for that, but it could be that a city the size of Ruston could do some of that. You would think that Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Shreveport, and other major cities, potentially that's an option. But it would be great if we got more cars off the road, allowed people to get where they needed to go by alternative means, whether it's bicycle, it could be rail too, because we're not doing much passenger rail in Louisiana, and that's something that I'm trying to work through from a regional perspective, working with other southern governors to get more Amtrak trains on the railroad tracks.
Governor, we're in our final minute, actually our final 30 seconds. Any parting remarks you have for the people of our state at this time?
Well, I just want the people to know that the nation has been watching Louisiana, and the extent to which the people of Louisiana have just been there for one another, being neighbor for one another, being just innately good people. That has not gone unnoticed. And people all around the country, when I talk to them, whether they call me or I meet them in Washington, they comment on that. So I just want to thank the people for being just such wonderful folks out there in Louisiana.